Human beings have always found ways to punish each other. Some punishments are about justice, others are about revenge, but some are purely about sending a message through cruelty so intense that it burns itself into history. In today's deep dive, we'll travel through centuries and across continents to explore the most terrifying, humiliating, and agonizing punishments ever recorded, from quick executions to torture methods designed to keep victims alive and suffering for days or even weeks. Yakuza finger removal. Yubitsum. We start in Japan's criminal underworld, where mistakes are paid for in flesh. Yubitsum, meaning finger shortening, is a ritual apology among Yakuza members. If you offend the group, fail in your duties, or cause a major loss, you don't just say, "I'm sorry." You take a blade, place your little finger on a cutting board, and slice it clean off. The pain is instant and overwhelming. Traditionally, the fingertip is wrapped in cloth and presented to the wronged superior. But there's more than symbolism here. Losing a portion of the little finger weakens your grip on a katana, making you physically less capable of defending yourself and more dependent on the group for protection. Survivable? Usually. But without modern medicine, infection could still mean death. Bastinado. Now, imagine the most sensitive part of your body being beaten relentlessly. Not your face, not your back, but your bare feet. Bastinado was practiced from the Middle East to Imperial China, and it focuses entirely on striking the soles with sticks, canes, or knotted cords. The skin on the feet is thin but packed with nerve endings, making each strike feel like a burning, stabbing jolt that shoots through the whole leg. It rarely killed, but walking afterward could be impossible for weeks, and permanent nerve damage wasn't uncommon. In extreme cases, bones in the feet shattered, leaving the victim with a lifelong limp. Pitch capping. Used during the Irish Rebellion of 1798, pitch capping was equal parts torture and humiliation. The victim's head was fitted with a paper or cloth cone. Hot tar or pitch was poured inside until it reached the scalp. Once it cooled and hardened, the cap was violently ripped away, taking hair, skin, and sometimes chunks of flesh. It was meant to scar the victim for life, both physically and psychologically. Survivors bore grotesque bald patches or open wounds that took months to heal, if they healed at all. Elephant's foot. Gungar. In ancient India and parts of Southeast Asia, justice could come in the form of an elephant. These animals were trained not only for war, but for public executions. The merciful version saw the elephant crush the skull in a single blow, quick, if not painless. The cruel version, reserved for those the ruler wanted to suffer, had the elephant crush the limbs first, snapping arms and legs while the victim screamed. Then, once the crowd had been entertained, the elephant delivered the final killing blow. Pinnaculiae. In ancient Rome, killing your father was the ultimate crime, and it came with the ultimate punishment. Pinnaculiae, meaning penalty of the sack, was exactly that. The condemned was sewn inside a leather sack with a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster, then thrown into a river. The animals, terrified and thrashing, would bite and claw in the cramped darkness. The victim's last minutes were panic, pain, and chaos, before drowning in the cold water. Roman decimation. Roman military discipline was brutal. In cases of mutiny or desertion, entire units could be punished by decimation. The soldiers were divided into groups of 10, and each group drew lots. Whoever got the shortest straw was executed by his 9 comrades, often by stoning, clubbing, or stabbing. The survivors then had to live outside the fortified camp without shelter or rations, exposed to the elements and enemies alike. It was designed to punish, but also to destroy morale and keep fear alive in every soldier's mind. Blowing from a gun. Used in India under British colonial rule, this execution method tied the condemned to the mouth of a cannon. When fired, the body was obliterated instantly, the head launching high into the air, limbs flying in all directions. The executioner's aim wasn't to prolong suffering. The death was immediate, but to terrify onlookers into submission. Basil II's blind journey. The Byzantine Emperor Basil II was feared as the Bulgar Slayer. After capturing 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers in battle, he divided them into groups of 100. In each group, 99 men were blinded completely. The last man was blinded in one eye, so he could lead the others home. When Bulgarian Tsar Samuel saw the endless lines of his blinded soldiers returning, The shock reportedly caused him to die of a heart attack on the spot. Castor oil poop barrels. This punishment weaponized the human body's own misery. The victim was force-fed enormous amounts of castor oil, triggering uncontrollable diarrhea. Then, they were locked inside a large barrel, unable to move, eat, or escape the filth. Some were kept there until they confessed to a crime. Others were left until they drowned in their own waste. A disgusting, dehumanizing death. Yermit. Walling in this form of execution or imprisonment, the victim was sealed in a confined space, often behind a brick wall. For execution, they were left to starve and dehydrate in total darkness. For imprisonment, a small opening allowed occasional food and water. The psychological torment of immobility, isolation, and claustrophobia was often worse than the physical suffering. The rack, one of medieval Europe's most infamous torture devices, the rack stretched the victim's body horizontally. Rollers at either end pulled the arms and legs in opposite directions, dislocating joints and tearing muscles. Interrogators could stop short or keep going until the limbs tore clean from the torso. The sound of tendons snapping haunted everyone who heard it. Tarring and feathering. This punishment humiliated as much as it harmed. The victim was stripped, coated in hot tar, and then covered in feathers. The burns caused permanent scarring, while the feathers turned the victim into a living spectacle. The goal wasn't always death, it was public ridicule, a walking warning to others. Choke pear. A pear-shaped metal device was inserted into the victim's mouth, rectum, or genitals. Once inside, it was expanded using a screw mechanism, tearing flesh apart. It was slow, intimate, and excruciating. Aztec heart removal. The Aztecs sacrificed humans to honor their gods. Victims were held on a stone slab while a priest used an obsidian blade to slice into the chest and remove the still-beating heart. The heart was lifted toward the sky before being offered to the deity, and the body was cast down the temple steps. Heretics fork. A metal rod with spikes at both ends, one end under the chin, the other against the chest, was strapped around the victim's neck. This prevented any head movement. Try to nod off, and the spikes would pierce the throat. Victims often died from exhaustion. Rat's cup. A cage of hungry rats was strapped to the victim's body. Heat was applied to the cage, forcing the rats to dig through flesh to escape. In South American variations, the rats were inserted into the rectum via a tube, chewing their way out from inside. Catherine's will. The victim was tied to a massive wooden wheel, and their limbs were smashed with an iron bar. Sometimes they were left alive for days, displayed for the public to see until they finally died of dehydration or exposure. Boiling. A live execution by boiling involved submerging the victim in boiling liquid, often oil or water. In its most sadistic form, the liquid started cold and was heated gradually, making death agonizingly slow. Keel hauling. At sea, sailors could be keel-hauled, dragged under the ship's hull from one side to the other. The barnacle covered with shredded skin, and drowning was common. If the victim survived, the process was repeated. Sawing. Hung upside down to keep the brain supplied with blood, the victim was sawed in half starting at the groin. This positioning meant they stayed conscious for much of the ordeal. Hanged, drawn, and quartered reserved for high treason in medieval England. This multi-step execution began with being dragged to the gallows. The victim was hanged until near death, disemboweled, beheaded, and then cut into 4 pieces, each displayed publicly as a warning. Glass rod torture. A glass rod was inserted into the urethra and then smashed with a hammer, sending razor-sharp fragments into the flesh. Bamboo torture. Bamboo grows quickly, up to a foot per day. If planted under a restrained victim, it would pierce the skin and slowly grow through the body. Spanish donkey. The victim sat astride a sharp, angled beam like riding a horse, with weights tied to their legs. The pressure cut into flesh until the body split apart. Brazen bull. A hollow bronze bull held the condemned inside. A fire underneath heated the metal until the victim roasted alive. Pipes converted screams into a bull-like bellow, and steam escaped from the nostrils for dramatic effect. Impalement. Victims were slowly lowered onto a sharpened stake, often avoiding vital organs so they remained alive for hours or days, writhing in pain as gravity slowly drove the stake deeper. Flaying. Skin was carefully peeled from the body while the victim was still alive. This could take hours, and death usually came from shock or infection. Blood eagle. In this Norse execution ritual, the ribs were cut from the spine and spread apart like wings. The lungs were pulled out and draped over the shoulders. Death was slow and suffocating. Lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. This Chinese method kept the victim alive through dozens, sometimes hundreds, of shallow cuts before finally striking a fatal blow. Some variations involved pouring mercury into wounds to separate flesh from skin. Scaphism, perhaps the worst of all. The condemned was trapped between two boats with their head, arms, and legs sticking out. They were force-fed milk and honey until diarrhea set in, then smeared with more honey to attract insects. For days, flies, wasps, and worms fed on the victim's flesh. Rats burrowed into open sores. Some survived more than 2 weeks, their bodies rotting while still alive.